In the Texas desert, the very air is your enemy.
I'll keep going, even if I'm alone.
Justice knows no borders.
Under the relentless sun, Operation Big Bend, when the thermometer read 52 degrees Celsius in the shade, and there wasn't a shadow to be found for miles, that's when I learned that pursuing a man through the West Texas desert isn't just a matter of tracking or strategy, but of basic survival against elements that kill as efficiently as any weapon. I'm Sergeant Bradley Hartman, 19 years serving in the Texas Department of Public Safety, specializing in search operations in hostile terrain. And that August 2019 mission remains the most physically brutal I've ever faced. The fugitive was Raymond Lee Vickers, 43 years old, wanted for violent crimes, including a bank robbery in Midland with hostages and a subsequent shootout with patrol officers that left one officer seriously wounded before Vickers escaped in a stolen vehicle into the desert lands near Big Bend National Park. He had a 6-hour head start when our team was mobilized. Enough time to penetrate deep into one of the most inhospitable and uninhabited regions of the continental United States. An area where cell phones don't work, where paved roads disappear into dirt tracks that fade into the undulating horizon of sand and volcanic rock. For 9 days, we chased a ghost through a landscape that seemed like another planet, dealing not only with an armed and desperate suspect, but also with constant dehydration, equipment failing under extreme heat, vehicles breaking down on terrain that shreds suspensions and tires as if they were toys. What kept the team together wasn't motivational speeches or promises of glory, but a silent and shared commitment that the officer wounded in Midland deserved justice, and that citizens deserved to know that the law reaches even the most remote and harsh corners of Texas territory. The operation began with a confidence that quickly proved naive when confronted with the reality of the Chihuahua Desert. Stretching hundreds of kilometers across the Texas-Mexico border, my team consisted of 8 rangers besides myself. 4 experienced trackers, including a veteran named Samuel Rodriguez, who grew up on an isolated ranch and knew that type of terrain since childhood. 2 communication specialists trying to maintain contact with central coordination despite geography that blocked radio signals. A field paramedic prepared for medical emergencies, which were a statistical probability in such a hostile environment. And a helicopter pilot assigned for air support, when conditions permitted safe flight. We departed from Alpine at 4 in the morning when the temperature was still tolerable. A convoy of 3 SUVs equipped for all-terrain use, loaded with enough water for 10 days, 200 liters per vehicle. Because desert survival calculations always begin with hydration. Vickers' last confirmed sighting was at an abandoned gas station near Talingua, where he apparently abandoned the stolen vehicle after realizing the overheated engine wouldn't withstand the desert crossing, continuing on foot or possibly obtaining alternative transportation from a local resident through coercion or deception. Rodriguez found partial footprints in the sand near the gas station, a gait pattern indicating someone carrying significant weight, likely a backpack, with supplies stolen from the station itself. We followed that faint trail for 17 kilometers until the sand gave way to volcanic rock, where the footprints disappeared completely, forcing us to switch from direct tracking to analyzing probable routes based on topography and the location of water sources. Because even a desperate criminal eventually needs to drink or die trying to avoid capture. Let me ask you, where are you watching this story from? Comment below. And if you want to hear more real accounts of operations like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because every day there's a new story straight from those who faced real danger. The second day brought the first major ordeal when one of the SUVs sank up to its axles in a dry riverbed, covered in fine sand that seemed solid, but collapsed under the vehicle's weight like a natural trap. It took us 3 hours under the scorching sun, using hydraulic jacks, metal planks, and sheer brute force to extract the vehicle, consuming precious water both for hydration and to cool the engine, which threatened to overheat. During that process, Rodriguez continued sweeping the area on foot and found evidence that confirmed we were on the right track. The remains of a recent campfire, poorly extinguished and partially covered but still with hot ashes in the center, protected from the wind. Vickers had probably camped there 12 to 15 hours earlier, based on the residual temperature and decomposition of the organic remains. More significantly, we found an empty container of a potent painkiller, suggesting that the fugitive was injured or at least suffering from physical conditions from the crossing. This gave us a psychological advantage because a person in pain makes errors in judgment, but it also made the situation more dangerous because a wounded and cornered man reacts unpredictably. We adjusted our strategy, assuming that Vickers was likely heading towards one of the isolated communities near the border, small clusters of ranches where he could try to obtain a vehicle, supplies, or even refuge among residents who might not know his legal status. We divided the team into 2 units of 4 to cover more territory, maintaining radio contact when geography allowed, but accepting that long periods of communication silence were inevitable in that vast, dead electronic wasteland. Day 4 marked an emotional low point in the operation when temperatures brutally peaked at midday and a vehicle's air conditioning system completely failed, forcing 4 men to squeeze into the 2 remaining vehicles, while the desert transformed a disabled SUV into a metal furnace that likely reached 80 degrees internally. Morale was shattered. Water was being consumed faster than planned due to the excessive heat, and the support helicopter couldn't fly because surface winds created dangerous thermal currents that made low-level flying almost suicidal. It was then that leadership decision-making became critical, a moment when it would have been perfectly justifiable to retreat to base, resupply, and resume the search with a different strategy. But they also knew that every hour of delay gave Vickers more opportunity to reach populated areas where they could disappear, or worse, put civilians at risk. I gathered the team in the makeshift shade of a tarp stretched between vehicles and spoke the truth without embellishment. I know we're on the edge. I know this is harder than anyone anticipated, but one of ours is in the hospital because of this man, and families are sleeping in fear while he's free. I'll keep going, even if I'm alone, but I need each and every one of you to do this right and bring everyone back alive. There were no heroic speeches in response, just silent nods and a return to work, because true professionals understand that commitment isn't about feeling good, but about doing what's necessary when nothing else matters. Rodriguez, whose age was nearing 60, but whose stamina put men half his age to shame, found a new trail that afternoon, drag marks in the sand suggesting Vickers was now having significant difficulty walking, possibly due to advanced dehydration or an aggravation of a previous injury. As we entered the 6th day, a pattern began to emerge from the fragmented data we had collected. Vickers was moving in a wide arc that would eventually converge on a small cluster of isolated ranches near Redford, a community of fewer than 100 people where the Rio Grande formed a natural border with Mexico. We coordinated with Border Patrol and federal marshals to establish a discreet perimeter around the area, not an obvious roadblock that would alert the fugitive, but enough presence to intercept him if he attempted to cross the border or obtain transportation. Our team continued the ground approach, now with a renewed sense of purpose because the end was finally in sight after days of uncertainty. In the early morning of the 7th day, we received a radio call from the local sheriff. A rancher reported that a man matching Vickers' description had appeared asking for water and food, behaving erratically and clearly in a deteriorated physical state. When the rancher asked if he needed medical help, the man aggressively refused and disappeared again into the surrounding desert. We finally had a precise and recent location. We mobilized immediately, the helicopter finally able to fly because the predicted sandstorm was still hours away. From the air, the pilot identified a lone figure moving slowly through a dry ravine, approximately 3 kilometers north of the ranch, attempting to reach a group of rock formations that would offer shelter and a defensive position. There was no more time for an elaborate encirclement. We needed to act before he reached those rocks or before the storm made the operation impossible. 2 teams converged from different directions while the helicopter maintained an overhead position, forcing Vickers to continue moving instead of entrenching himself. The final confrontation took place in a dry stream bed surrounded by 3-meter-high rock walls, a geography that ironically favored us because it limited escape routes to only 2 directions, which we both covered with strategically positioned personnel. When Vickers realized he was effectively cornered, he attempted to climb the rock wall, but his physical condition was so compromised that he could barely raise his arms above his head. Through a megaphone, I announced our presence and ordered surrender. "Raymond Vickers, Texas Rangers, you are surrounded with no way out. Drop any weapons you are carrying and lie on the ground with your hands visible. We have water and medical assistance available." For a long 30 seconds there was no response, only a hunched figure breathing heavily, leaning against the rock, and I mentally prepared myself for the possibility that it would end violently. But then, perhaps due to complete exhaustion or finally recognizing the futility of further resistance, Vickers raised his visibly trembling hands and collapsed to his knees in the sand. The team advanced with professional caution, securing the suspect and checking for weapons while a paramedic immediately began medical assessment. Vickers was severely dehydrated, sunburned to the point of having open blisters on his arms and neck, and apparently had an untreated gunshot wound to his left thigh from the original shooting in Midland, which had become infected and necrotic after days without proper care. We provided immediate intravenous hydration and helicopter evacuation to a hospital in Alpine, where he was treated under guard before being formally charged. There were no shots fired during the capture, no violence beyond the minimum necessary to secure handcuffs, only the professional execution of an operation that tested everyone involved to the absolute limits of physical and mental capacity. Years have passed since that brutal week in the West Texas desert, but the lessons remain etched deeper than any tattoo or physical scar. Raymond Vickers was tried and sentenced to 45 years in federal prison on multiple charges including assault, kidnapping, and assault on a law enforcement officer, a sentence that guarantees he will spend the rest of his productive life behind bars paying for choices he made. The officer wounded in Midland survived after multiple surgeries and eventually returned to active duty, retiring honorably 3 years later. For my team, Operation Big Bend became a story we tell new recruits not as an example of heroism, but as a lesson in perseverance when absolutely everything is working against you. I learned that leadership is not about inspiring speeches, but about making tough decisions and taking responsibility for the consequences, about knowing when to push the team beyond their comfort zone and when to recognize true safety limits. The desert taught humility in a way no academy instructor ever could, constantly reminding us that nature doesn't care about badges or authority, killing the prepared and unprepared with equal indifference if you don't respect its relentless rules. But it also confirmed a fundamental truth that underpins all law enforcement in a functioning society. That distance offers no immunity, that isolation guarantees no escape, and that when lines have been crossed and laws broken, there will be men and women willing to endure extreme conditions to ensure that justice eventually prevails, no matter how much time or sacrifice is required. That's why we wear badges and swear to serve, not just on easy days of routine urban patrolling, but especially in moments that test whether commitment is real or merely performative, when personal costs become uncomfortably high.